Hey there and welcome to BingeBot, where we recap all the latest and greatest TV shows to help keep you in the loop. Today, prepare for a perplexing murder mystery in Presumed Innocent Season 1, a thrilling crime drama starring Jake Gyllenhaal. If you like our videos and you want to help out the channel, you can do so now via YouTube memberships, Patreon, or Buy Me a Coffee. And thanks to everyone for the continued support. Without any further ado, let's jump in with Episode 1, Bases Loaded. While spending time at home with his children, Jaden and Kyle, Chicago prosecutor Rusty Sabich receives a call from District Attorney Raymond Horgan. And after the shocking call, he pulls his wife Barbara inside and informs her that his co-worker, Carolyn Polhemus, was murdered. He departs, anxiously driving to the scene of the crime where he finds her body lying on the floor half-dressed and surrounded by a forensic team, her wrists and ankles tied together behind her back. Back in their dim office, Rusty tensely discusses the case with his co-workers. As Nico Della Guardia and Tommy Molto, fellow prosecutors, try to argue for the case, Raymond asserts that he chose Rusty for a reason. He needs the best lawyer on the case.
You dismiss me,
I just want the best lawyer for the job, and it's Rusty.
In the morning, Rusty attends Carolyn's memorial and speaks with Raymond about his progress. After the church service, they go for a drink at a local bar to continue talking, and there, Rusty learns that Carolyn has a son named Michael, whom she had never mentioned to him before, and who lives with her strange ex-husband, Dalton Caldwell. He also brings up a similar murder from the past in which the victim had been tied up in the exact same way as Carolyn, leading him to suspect that there's a connection between the two crimes. He implies to the DA that there is a chance they'd gotten the wrong man convicted before. The next day, Tommy watches a recording of the court trial in which Rusty and Carolyn had gotten Liam Reynolds convicted for the murder of Bunny Davis, the crime Rusty now suspects is related to his co-workers. After the clip, Tommy calls Nico to discuss the similarities between this case and Carolyn's. In the afternoon, Rusty and Detective Elena Rodriguez, nicknamed Rigo, visit the prison where Reynolds is being held. She believes that Carolyn had been bludgeoned to death with a fire poker and that the murder was seemingly not planned. The pair speak with Reynolds about the crime, who simply mocks the idea of having ever been involved and boldly states that they have ruined his life. In the midst of the murder investigation, Nico is running against Raymond to be elected as DA. He publicly claims that Raymond is not doing his job effectively and therefore affecting the safety of the people, boasting that he would do far better in his place. Searching for any helpful information that he can find, Rusty visits Dalton at his home, who begrudgingly allows him inside to talk. Dalton shares that he has never been privy to much of Carolyn's personal life, even before their divorce.
I never knew that she had a child.
Carolyn was a very compartmentalized person. I'm sure there are many things about her that remain unknown to me.
After a tense meeting discussing the case with Tommy and his other coworkers, reporters catch Rusty on his way home from work and ask him for details. He gives away nothing official as it is an active investigation, but he uses the opportunity to both give props to Raymond and provide examples that Nico isn't cut out for DA. Later, Barbara reveals Rusty's past affair with Carolyn and expresses that she does not want this to come into light for the sake of everyone involved. She grows worried for the stability of their marriage as he gets deeper into the case. Settling in for the evening, the Sabich family lies together on their couch and watches the news on the television, which shows Nico giving an acceptance speech after winning in the DA election. Barbara comforts Rusty as Nico's win means that he will lose his job to Tommy. She tells him the only reason she has stayed with him through everything, especially the affair, is for the sake of their family. She states that they need to keep fighting together for what they have, and he needs to stop loving Carolyn for it to work. The following day, Rusty and Raymond learn that several sets of fingerprints were found in Carolyn's apartment, including Rusty's own in her bedroom, and that Carolyn had been pregnant at the time of her murder.
Full path report came back on Carolyn's murder, and she was pregnant. Were you aware that Carolyn was pregnant at the time of the murder?
Episode 2, People vs. Rosette Sabich. In a conference room, Rusty continues his conversation with Nico, Tommy, and Raymond about his relationship with Carolyn. He denies having any idea who the father of her unborn child was and leaves the room wordlessly. After a brief argument with Raymond, Rusty is stopped by Tommy, who requests that he take a paternity test. At home, Rusty sits down with his wife to inform her of what he had just learned and that he is now a suspect in Carolyn's murder. He sorrowfully tells her that despite his affair having supposedly ended over a year ago, he and Carolyn had reconnected briefly much more recently. Meanwhile, Raymond discusses the news of the affair with his wife Lorraine, who criticizes him for not having picked up on anything. In the evening, Rusty studies the autopsy reports from both the Bunny Davis and Carolyn Pohemus cases and notices a discrepancy, which he goes to confront Dr. Kumagai in the morgue about. There, he finds that there was a second semen sample present at the Davis' murder scene, which the doctor tells him that Carolyn had known about and that it was contaminated and therefore inconclusive. Shortly after this, Tommy goes to see Nico. He claims that he saw Rusty grabbing the doctor, assaulting him, and declares that Rusty is sick, though Nico disregards the information. Around this time, Rusty comes home to his family having dinner, and once he sits down, Barbara urges him into telling the kids about the affair. After hearing this, both Kyle and Jaden wordlessly get up and leave the room, looking shocked and upset. Early in the morning, Rusty wakes up to the sound of Kyle repeatedly throwing a ball at their shed and gets up to coax him inside. And while they're talking, the police show up in front of their home and inform Rusty that they've received a search warrant. As the police commence their search of the house, the family sits together on the couch silently and grimly. One of the officers has Rusty give a DNA sample for the paternity test, and following this, he goes into the office to confront Tommy over the time of the warrant, but he only ends up getting placed on administrative leave. The next morning, Barbara and Rusty visit his therapist, where he tells them that he is sure he'll be arrested once the investigators have gone through his personal belongings. Later, he visits Raymond in his home and catches up with him on the past day's events. He requests that Raymond be his attorney, as he is familiar how Tommy and Nico work.
You are the best lawyer that I know, and I need you.
Do you have an ounce of humility?
But do you really think that I killed her, do you? You know me.
I thought I did.
With Rigo's help, Rusty goes in to visit Reynolds once again. He offers a way to possibly shorten his sentence in exchange for information, but Reynolds gives him nothing but sass. In the car after, he begs Rigo to help him find reasonable doubt for his guiltiness in the murder, while later that night, Raymond and Lorraine discuss whether or not he wants to defend Rusty in court. After getting home, Rusty gets a call that confirms he was the father of Carolyn's child.
Hello?
Hey, we got the lab results back. Paternity confirmed. Sorry, Rusty, I know it's not what you wanted to hear.
Immediately following this, the police arrive at his front door and promptly arrest him. The next day, Rusty is taken in for his arraignment, where he finds Raymond waiting in the courtroom as his attorney. They plead not guilty, and his bail is set while also electing to skip a pretrial. After court, when the Savage family sits together and talks about the situation, Rusty receives a text from an unknown number saying, "You were there. I saw you." Episode 3: Discovery. After receiving the strange message, Rusty spirals, trying in a panic to contact the unknown number that had threatened him. And the next morning, Raymond is startled awake by a dream of Rusty murdering Carolyn. He spends time talking with his wife about how the case is affecting him and may in the future, but remains adamant that Rusty did not commit the murder. While isolating at home with his family, news vans and reporters lurking outside, Rusty receives a second ominous text from the stranger that gives a location and a time to meet. He shares this with Raymond, who presses for information on what he had been doing at Carolyn's apartment on the night of her death. That afternoon, Barbara visits the gallery that she works at and is asked to take a step back until things cool down for the sake of both her and her employer. Afterwards, she goes for a drink by herself and finds some comfort in the banter with the young bartender, Clifton. Meanwhile, Nico removes Rigo from the Carolyn case, claiming that she is impeding justice by helping out Rusty. Despite Raymond's warnings, Rusty decides to meet with the stranger that has been texting him, and at the meeting point, he finds Michael, Carolyn's son. Michael asks Rusty why he killed his mom and claims that he has pictures and videos of Rusty on the night that she died, and that he's already given the evidence to the district attorney.
If you have photographs, you need to make sure that you give them to me or you give them to the police.
I already gave them to the police. I met with the district attorney.
Upon arrival for his status meeting with Nico, Tommy, and the judge, Rusty meets with Raymond and his new assistant for the case, Maya. At dinner that night, Jaden implores her father to tell them what evidence they have against him. He shares every relevant detail openly, expressing that the majority of it is circumstantial, but can still be damaging. Kyle asks if he's considered a guilty plea bargain for a shorter sentence, which leads Rusty to having a breakdown in the bathroom and being comforted by Barbara. In the evening, Nico and Tommy meet for a drink, and Nico decides to stop the obstruction charge on Rusty, saying that it'll be easier for them to get him convicted of the murder charge by itself. He accuses Tommy of hating Rusty and being vindictive in how he's handling the case against him. While setting up an office space, Maya questions Rusty about the state of his relationship with Carolyn, stating she needs information in case he has to testify in court. He shares the moment when he first felt an emotional attraction to her beyond lust. Later that day, they and Raymond take a trip to Carolyn's home where Rusty is plagued by memories of his time there with her. And while scrolling through the photos of him in her home, he finds a picture of his son biking past the house. Episode 4. The Burden. While sitting in his room listening to music, Kyle is asked by his parents to come downstairs, where they inquire about what he was doing near Carolyn's home in the photos. He admits that he had heard them fighting about Rusty's affair and had followed them there to try and understand. The conversation eventually leads to a fight between Rusty and Barbara, which ends with her telling him that she is done. The following day, Dalton and Michael meet with Tommy in his office, and Tommy asks Michael about the photos he had taken, why he was there, and how Rusty was acting when he saw him at Carolyn's. Michael shares that Carolyn had told him that a man at work had started to scare her, which he believes to be Rusty, and that he is confident that Rusty killed her.
And I asked her what was wrong, and she said that there's a man at work that's beginning to scare her.
Meanwhile, Barbara visits the bartender that she had met previously, Clifton, and has another drink with him. While on the train, Rigo calls Rusty and lets him know that she's identified the other sperm sample from the Bunny Davis case. It belongs to a man named Brian Ratzer. So they visit Ratzer's home and ask him a few questions, which leads him to becoming agitated and telling them to leave due to Rusty's vague threats. In the morning, Kyle has his first therapy session, but due to his lack of communication and his desire to share, their therapist recommends going to someone else for him and Rusty. And later, Nico expresses his worries with Tommy on how he is handling the case, believing that it has become a personal witch hunt. In Raymond's office, Rusty explains to Maya what he'd been doing on the night of Carolyn's death. He claims that they had mostly argued, disagreeing about him wanting to get back together before she'd kissed him goodbye and then made him leave. Once she's heard him out, Maya tells Raymond that there's no way that they can let Rusty into the witness chair. Afterward, Raymond goes to see Nico and Tommy in their office. On his way in, he runs into Eugenia, another prosecutor, and speaks with her about her having being listed as a witness, but she affirms that she has no intention to testify against Rusty. During a meeting with Tommy and Nico, Raymond points out that they have no real case against Rusty and are merely grasping at straws and requests a plea deal for the obstruction charge. However, Nico shows him a file that leaves him shocked. In the midst of having a conversation about the state of their relationship, Rusty and Barbara are interrupted by a call from Raymond. He shares his surprise that Rusty's DNA was found behind Carolyn's fingernails.
Your skin was found under Carolyn's fingernails.
Like, it's a lie.
DNA is DNA, Rusty.
No, it's a lie. Oh my God.
While Rusty is denying this, someone begins aggressively banging on their front door while screaming, and he opens the door to find Brian Ratzer, who threatens and then mindlessly attacks him. Episode 5. Pre-game. Kicking Ratzer down his porch steps, Rusty yells at him to leave and then hurries back inside to his terrified family. But afterwards, he tells Barbara about who Ratzer is and why he had come to their home, assuring her that Ratzer will not go to the police. The following afternoon, Rusty attempts to break into the Ratzer's home after watching them leave the property. However, Brian catches him and confronts him with well-met ire, but agrees to have a conversation. While discussing the incident, Raymond tells Rusty that his downward spiral throughout this investigation can easily be used to make him out as a sociopath. Late at night, while alone in his office, Tommy recalls a memory in which he had confronted Carolyn for supposedly not wanting to work with him. As he remembers her denial and explanation, Nico enters the room and brings up the possibility of Liam Reynolds as a suspect, but Tommy shuts down this notion without a second thought, being solely focused on Rusty. Elsewhere, against her better judgment, Barbara calls Clifton and meets him late at night. She visits his place and they share a kiss, although she later speaks about it with her therapist as a regretful experience. The next day at their office, Raymond, Rusty, and Maya speak with Brian. Maya questions him about his acquaintance with both Bunny Davis and Liam Reynolds, to which he shares that he may have slept with Davis, but he has never seen Reynolds before. After, Raymond pleads with Rusty to let him win the case based on his innocence rather than someone else's guilt, and suggests having Barbara testify in court on his behalf. In the morning, everyone tensely files into the courtroom for the beginning of Rusty's trial. Tommy opens up the conversation by welcoming the jury, talking about Carolyn, and urging them to be faithful to the truth. Episode 6. The Elements. On the second day of the trial, Dr. Kumagai goes over the medical evidence from the witness stand. He details the various wounds inflicted on Carolyn's body and the cause of death, as well as the estimated time of death between 10 p.m. and midnight. Raymond confirms with him that there was no fitting weapon present at the scene of the crime and that he cannot medically determine who wielded it.
I can only state with an absolute certainty that this was a homicide.
And no thin, heavy object or murder weapon of any kind has been recovered?
Correct.
After, Raymond and Maya try to convince Barbara to change her demeanor while in court to persuade the jury, to which she adamantly refuses to be anything but truthful. On the third day of the trial, forensic pathologist Jeremy Buck further details the evidence that was found at the scene. He shares that despite there being several samples of Rusty's DNA detected on Carolyn's body, none was found on the rope that she had been tied up with. Buck expresses that, in his professional opinion, it had been a very unplanned murder followed by a methodical act of tying her up and hiding any evidence. Following his testimony, Raymond asks him questions about Liam Reynolds and mentions that he had claimed he'd get even with Carolyn and Rusty after being convicted. He also asks Buck if the evidence that he claims proves that Rusty killed Carolyn, his DNA under her fingernails and the saliva on her collar, could also imply that they just kissed, given their previous intimacy. The following day, Eugenia sits in the witness stand and provides what she had known of Rusty and Carolyn's relationship, including times she had seen them kissing and fighting. She shares that she thought he was becoming obsessed with Carolyn, but she had never made a complaint about it to HR. However, she was aware that Carolyn had made a complaint about Tommy.
Did she ever make a complaint to HR about anyone?
Yes.
Who?
Tommy Malto.
Later that evening, Jaden tells Rusty about disassociation and how people's brains can try and protect them from things that they do that they cannot reconcile. She asks if he's ever experienced this, but he insists that his memory is fine. Later on, Barbara confesses to him about her brief relationship with Clifton, and Rusty loses his temper, comparing the situation to his own, and yells at her, grabbing her roughly by the arm before she leaves the room. The next day in court, Michael is set to testify. He shares that he would visit his mother's house and watch through the windows from the shadows outside, and he claims to have seen Rusty there frequently, including the night that she died. Tommy then questions him about when he met with Rusty after the murder and why he believes that he was the killer. Just moments after he begins his questions for Michael, Raymond passes out, collapsing on the floor.
Right?
Rusty immediately rushes towards him, attempting CPR, with paramedics soon taking over while he watches in horror with Lorraine. Episode 7. The Witness. After having collapsed in court from cardiac arrest, Raymond is rushed to the hospital where Rusty, Lorraine, Maya, Nico, and Tommy all sit in the waiting room. The doctors soon come out to tell Lorraine that he is going to be okay, his health now improved with a pacemaker. And while driving from the emergency room, Nico tries to convince Tommy that they need to call a mistrial, but is met with vehement disagreement. In the judge's office, Rusty declares that with Raymond out of commission, he would like to represent himself as lead counsel with Maya as his second defense. The judge says that this is a bad idea, but she will allow it to go forward. The following day, Rusty cross-examines Michael. He pulls up screenshots of threads of hateful messages that Michael had sent to Carolyn over the last few weeks before she had been murdered, including one that says, "It would be easier if you were dead." He reveals that the police had found niche, descriptive articles on many of Carolyn's cases, including the murder of Bunny Davis, on Michael's computer. To point out that the police had stepped over many loose ends in the case, he bluntly asks Michael if he or his father had killed his mother, causing an uproar, especially from Dalton. The next day in court, Nico calls Rigo to the witness stand to be questioned. He plays a recording from the day that Rusty had attempted to bargain with Reynolds.
So, just to be clear, you're telling me incriminating myself
if you had an accomplice
murder could lead to my freedom?
Yes.
And in response to his inquiries, Rigo shares that Rusty had initially directed her to send all evidence and information to him alone. During his turn, Rusty confirms with her that he had maintained his innocence and that he had fairly mistrusted others with the evidence, which she agrees is normal to keep between the detective and the prosecutor on any given case. The following morning, Tommy calls Rusty to the stand. Judge Little approves the decision, as Rusty had unintentionally provided his version of events the prior day. After agreeing to testify, Rusty argues with Maya about the logic of his decision, prompting her to quit on the spot and leave him alone to defend himself. Amidst public criticism, Rusty takes the witness stand with Raymond and Maya back by his side. Tommy questions him on his disclosure of his and Carolyn's personal relationship and shows images of his vaguely threatening texts around the night of her death. Rusty explains that he hadn't been angry with her, but merely so passionate that it had blinded him from what was important. He compares this to Tommy's own passion to bring him down, despite the fact that he has no real evidence against him. He then apologizes for his emotional instability and blames it on experiencing the death of someone he loved. Tommy uses this information to say that Rusty had simply snapped in his violent interactions with both Brian Ratzer and Dr. Kumagai. At the end of the day, Tommy finally goes home, only to find a fire poker with an aggressive message on it placed on his kitchen counter. Episode 8. The Verdict. The same evening, the police investigate Tommy's house after he had found potential evidence there. He brings it in to discuss it with the judge and Rusty's team, where she offers a mistrial once again. But eventually they all agree to proceed, with the threat not being implemented as evidence. Later, Rusty tells Barbara that he is certain it was the poker from Carolyn's house, but he did not say anything of it in the judge's office. The following day, a second pathologist states that she puts the time of Carolyn's death between 1 and 3 a.m., based on her having an empty stomach when she had passed, compared with when she had ordered food that night. In response, Tommy points out that she cannot be medically certain that the ordered food had been consumed at that time or at all. While practicing his summation at night, Rusty is joined by Jaden, who tries to convince him not to make the closing statement. He claims that he is his own best chance, and she embraces him. On the final day of his trial, Rusty speaks to the jury about the case. He says that despite the evidence having proven without a doubt that he had betrayed his family, it does not prove that he had killed Carolyn Polhemus. He declares that he was brought on trial without any burden of proof, which is something he would have never done in his time as a prosecutor, and that there is ample reasonable doubt all over the case. Tearfully, he says that he deserves all the jury's contempt, but they cannot convict him without proof beyond reasonable doubt.
I deserve your contempt. As a husband, as a father, and as a man. But I did not kill Carolyn Polhemus, which is why there is no evidence that I did.
For his summation, Tommy claims that Rusty was not in love with Carolyn, but obsessed with her, and that he obstructed the case during the first 48 hours that he headed the investigation. He boasts that Rusty is both a very good liar and a murderer, and that there is a myriad of evidence to prove it. Tommy states that Rusty is desperate to get the blame off of himself by bringing up other people as suspects, and is borderline sociopathic.
Is him alluding to or accusing her son in all of this? It's diabolical, it's sociopathic, because he knew that the killer wasn't out there somewhere. The killer was right here.
Later, everyone regroups in the courtroom to hear the final verdict. The court clerk reads the statement aloud and declares that the jury's decision is that Rusty is not guilty.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Rosette K. Savage, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 6.
Once Rusty and his family have returned home, he speaks with the press outside about his verdict. He tells them that despite justice having been done in his favor, it has not been done for Carolyn, as her murderer is still out there, and claims that the prosecutor's office favored a vendetta against him over actual justice. However, later that night, Rusty finds Barbara while she's exercising and accuses her of having killed Carolyn, stating that he went through everything and did what he had to do to protect her and their family. He reveals that the night of Carolyn's death, he had gone back to her home and found her body, which he ended up tying up himself to cover up what he thought were Barbara's tracks. Rusty brings up him and Jaden's talk about disassociation and that he believes Barbara has experienced this and committed the murder while mentally out of her body. As he further explains that he had been tracking her car and he knew that she had gone to Tommy's house to plant the fire poker, Jaden enters the room and confesses that she was the one who had killed Carolyn. As both parents' worries and fears grow, Jaden admits that she had gone to Carolyn's house to confront her about the affair, and upon hearing Carolyn say that she was pregnant with Rusty's child, Jaden had blacked out, grabbed the fire poker from her side, and killed her in a fit of rage. After this shocking revelation, Rusty tells his daughter to never speak of what had happened and that she did it in defense of their family. He holds her tight, promising that they will all protect each other out of love, ensuring that the truth remains buried, never to be discovered. Well, that's the end of Presumed Innocent Season 1. Kind of a bleak ending, huh? Anyway, we hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you would be so kind, consider dropping us a like or share the video with a friend. It really does help us out. To always stay up to date with our newest stuff, be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new video. And again, thank you so much to all of our YouTube members, patrons, and Buy Me a Coffee supporters. Y'all are so awesome. That's it for now. We'll be back with another recap very, very soon. But until then, BingeBot is logging off.